The night was calm outside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. Guards at the gates stood alert but relaxed, watching the streets as they had countless times before. To them, the threat was always expected to come from beyond the walls, from shadows in the city, from foreign agents, from hostile militias. But what they didn't know was that the danger had already passed through those gates. It was walking inside the palace, wearing the uniform of loyalty, trusted by the man it was sent to betray. Inside, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, was seated in the solitude of his study. A dim desk lamp cast soft light on a thick intelligence brief spread across the polished wood. The report was troubling. Hints of foreign interference, whispers of a plot forming in Abidjan, rumors that France itself might be backing it. But the evidence was incomplete. Nothing concrete, nothing to act upon, yet enough to weigh on his mind. After hours of reading, the president leaned back, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. He rose from his chair and stepped into a private corridor leading toward his quarters. The palace halls were unusually quiet. The usual sound of aides and staff, the hum of radios in the distance, none of it was there. Just silence. And in that silence, someone was waiting. A familiar figure emerged from the dim light of the hallway. It was Yakuba Traoré, cousin to the president, a loyal commander, and one of his most trusted men. Tall, broad-shouldered, always steady, Yakuba wore his black uniform as he had for years. His presence had never been a reason for suspicion. "Late night, cousin?" Ibrahim asked, his voice calm but curious. Yakuba gave a faint smile. "I'll walk you to your room." The president nodded, relieved at the company. "Didn't think you were on shift tonight." "Couldn't sleep," Yakuba replied easily. "Figured I'd stay close. Things feel off lately." The two men walked side by side down the corridor. To any observer, it was a simple moment, family walking together, soldier and president sharing quiet words in the night. But beneath the silence, something else was moving. Unseen to Ibrahim, inside Yakuba's jacket rested a hidden pistol, a silenced weapon delivered months earlier during a covert trip across the border. That night in Abidjan, French agents posing as diplomats had taken Yakuba aside. They had spoken plainly. "We know who you are. You want a better life? Money, protection, exile? Do one thing." One clean shot, no witnesses. Yakuba hadn't answered then, but he hadn't refused either. He had taken the gun, and now every step he took beside his cousin grew heavier. This was no ordinary bond. The two men had fought together, bled together, survived ambushes in the bush as young soldiers. They had called each other brothers, not just cousins. And yet tonight, that bond was the weapon chosen against Ibrahim. The palace corridor was dark and empty. The hallway cameras normally always recording had been cut. The guards on duty had no reason to check. It was the perfect moment. As they reached the door to Ibrahim's quarters, Yakuba slowed. His hand brushed against the inside of his jacket, fingertips grazing the hidden weapon. Ibrahim turned to him, sensing the hesitation. "You all right?" he asked. Yakuba paused, eyes flickering with something unreadable guilt, fear, or perhaps confusion. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just tired, that's all." But his hand lingered near the gun. This was it. The point of no return. Ibrahim moved to thank his cousin, but then he saw it. The flicker in the eyes, the shift in stance, the hand dipping too quickly beneath the jacket. In that instant, training took over. The president didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Yakuba's wrist just as the pistol cleared the fabric. The weapon clattered to the marble floor, skidding across the hall. Yakuba dove for it, but Ibrahim was faster. He kicked the gun down the corridor, drew his own sidearm in one swift motion, and leveled it at his cousin's chest. The hallway fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of a ceiling fan. Yakuba froze, hands slowly rising, eyes wide. "Ibrahim, listen to me," he said, voice breaking. The president's tone was controlled, his words cold. "What are you doing?" Yakuba's chest heaved, sweat rolling down his temple. "I had no choice," he whispered. "They have my sister." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. Who? Yakuba looked away. Who sent you? Ibrahim demanded, louder this time. Yakuba's voice dropped to a whisper. They're watching everything. If I talk, they'll kill us both. The truth was clear now. This was no simple betrayal, no personal grudge. This was something larger, orchestrated far beyond the palace walls. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré understood. The enemy was not just at the gates, it was already inside. What had begun as a quiet walk to the president's quarters had erupted into a confrontation that would change everything. The pistol was out of reach, sliding across the polished tiles. The two men, once bonded by blood, now separated by betrayal, stood frozen in the dim corridor. Yakuba's hands remained in the air, his expression caught between guilt and despair. He had been trained for combat, hardened by war, yet now he looked like a man cornered by forces beyond his control. I trusted you, President Ibrahim Traoré said, his voice steady but heavy with disbelief. You ate at my table. You slept under my roof. I called you my brother. Yakuba's lips trembled. I know, his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. But they left me no choice. The president's eyes narrowed, cold and unflinching. Then tell me who. Yakuba shut his eyes, and for a moment, silence filled the hall. But the memory he carried was louder than any words, the image of his younger sister, bound to a chair in a dim basement, her eyes wide with terror. A camera had recorded every second. Behind it, a man with a flat French accent delivered the ultimatum. Fail us, and she dies. I thought I could stall, Yakuba muttered, the words spilling out like confession. Warn you at the last second. Find another way. But I was followed inside this palace. They're already here. The president's grip on his pistol tightened, his mind sharpened. This wasn't just a betrayal of family, it was proof of infiltration. Proof that foreign agents had already breached the inner circle of his government. How many? Ibrahim demanded. Yakuba swallowed hard. 3 others, one in the kitchen, one in communications, and one of your drivers. The words struck like a hammer. The palace wasn't just compromised, it was poisoned from within. How did they reach you? The president asked. Yakuba's voice fell to a low, broken whisper. I crossed into Ivory Coast on leave. They knew everything, my rank, my history, even where my sister studied. They didn't ask, they ordered. They told me you're dangerous, Ibrahim, that you're turning Africa into a weapon, that if you push them out, they lose everything. They said you're a threat they cannot afford to ignore. For a long moment, the president said nothing. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. With a subtle flick of his wrist, a silent alert was transmitted from the watch on his arm. Within seconds, the sound of boots echoed down the corridor. 4 elite guards appeared, rifles raised, their faces stern and unreadable. Take him to the black room, Ibrahim ordered calmly. Alive, no harm, I'll speak to him again in the morning. Yakuba didn't resist. He lowered his head, his body heavy with defeat, and allowed himself to be escorted away. He turned once, locking eyes with his cousin, but no words came, only silence. And then, Ibrahim was alone in the same palace where loyalty had been turned into a weapon. He locked his chamber door, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. His hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. Not because his cousin had tried to kill him, but because of who had sent him. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a message. They hadn't chosen bombs or bullets or chaos in the streets. They had chosen his family. They had chosen to break him from within. Ibrahim crossed the room to a drawer he kept sealed with a red wax emblem. He broke the seal and pulled out a file marked with one name, Operation Serpent. Inside were maps, intercepted notes, and coded documents. At the center of them all, one figure stood out. General Laurent Brissac, a retired French intelligence officer, off the books, but still pulling strings in West Africa. Brissac had been linked to a failed poisoning attempt on Ibrahim and Bobo Dioulasso just months earlier. Now his fingerprints were all over Yakuba's betrayal. This was no coincidence, no accident. It was strategy. Ibrahim picked up a secure satellite phone and dialed Colonel Tapsoba, the head of internal intelligence. "They've reached the inner circle," the president said flatly. "You want a sweep?" Tapsoba asked, his voice tense on the other end. "No," Ibrahim replied, his tone sharpened with resolve. "I want the system ripped open. Every name, every fingerprint. Every foreign call made inside this palace, logged, traced, interrogated, understood. No one leaves. No one sleeps. This is war." The line went silent. Then Tapsoba responded with a firm, "Yes, sir." Across the border, in a quiet villa on the outskirts of Abidjan, General Brissac received a message on his encrypted device. Just 4 words. "The attempt failed. He knows." The old operative didn't flinch. He simply leaned back, lit a cigar, and let the smoke curl around him. "So," he murmured to himself, "he's still alive." He smiled faintly. But the smile didn't last long. Back in Ouagadougou, dawn was breaking. Sunlight stretched across the capital, painting long shadows across the streets. Inside the palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré moved briskly through the halls, his expression sharp, his mind already calculating the next move. The war had begun. In a secure underground chamber, his top advisors gathered. The walls were lined with signal jammers. No communication could escape. Ibrahim entered without ceremony. His voice cut through the room. "We can't trust anyone. My own cousin tried to kill me last night." Gasps rippled across the table. Lieutenant Kabor, head of security, stood immediately. "We've launched a sweep, reviewing staff, vendors, visitors, surveillance logs." "It won't be enough," Ibrahim interrupted, his tone firm. "They're embedded too deep. They vanish before you even know they exist." Madame Ouedraogo, his foreign affairs advisor, leaned forward. "This is more than an attack on you. This is an assault on our sovereignty." "Exactly," Ibrahim said. "That's why I'm reaching out to Moscow and Beijing. We need tools, cyber, and signal intelligence. We trace this to its source." The room fell silent. No one objected. The rules of the game had changed. This was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It was about Africa itself. Far away, in his hidden safe house in Abidjan, General Laurent Brissac gazed out over the silent city. His phone buzzed with a coded message. "Traoré is mobilizing. Countermeasures ready." He didn't hesitate. He lit another cigar, leaned back in his chair, and gave the order. The voice on the other end, scrambled and disguised with a French accent, confirmed, "The cousin failed, but the operation continues. Escalation is underway." Brissac's answer was cold. Good. He must be broken. Not killed, not yet. Back in Ouagadougou, the president sat in his office staring out into the courtyard. The weight of betrayal hung heavy on his mind. Yakuba, his cousin, his brother in arms, was now a prisoner in the palace basement. Moussa Traoré, another cousin, head of his driver unit, was suddenly under suspicion. The betrayal was not random. It was calculated. Family had been chosen deliberately as weapons. Colonel Tapsoba, head of intelligence, delivered the next report. "We've begun interrogations. Some staff are talking, others refuse, but the breach is clear. Someone disabled the hallway cameras. Someone else cleared Yakuba's path." The president's response was sharp. "Find out who. No excuses." But just as the investigation began, another urgent development surfaced. A young officer burst into the room, pale and breathless. "Mr. President, urgent update. We intercepted a live call between Abidjan and a local contact. Codenames Serpent and Cobra were used." The president froze. Only a handful of people inside the palace knew those codenames. That meant the infiltrators weren't just close, they were at the very core of his circle. "They've mapped us," Ibrahim said, his voice low but firm. "Then we turn the map against them." The strategy shifted overnight. No more defense. No more waiting for the enemy to strike. Ibrahim's team began feeding disinformation, false troop movements, fake weaknesses, invented quarrels within the palace staff. Every word, every piece of intel was carefully planted through Yakuba and Musa, who were kept alive under strict watch. Colonel Tapsoba raised a warning. "You're turning them into double agents." "They're not agents," Ibrahim replied firmly. "They're pieces on the board, and this is our board now." From that moment, the palace became more than a fortress. It became a trap. Every corridor was rewired with new surveillance, every staff member revetted, every driver shadowed. Trust no longer existed, only strategy. Yakuba and Musa, once branded traitors, were transformed into conduits. Their secret communications with French handlers were monitored, edited, and sent under the president's command. The enemy believed they were still guiding their pawns. In reality, they were being guided themselves. In Abidjan, Brissac began to notice delays, strange inconsistencies in the reports. "They're stalling," he muttered to himself. He ordered an escalation, mercenary units to cross the border, operatives to move faster, strike before Traoré could regroup. But it was too late. The ambush was already waiting. As French-backed mercenaries slipped into Burkina Faso, they found themselves walking straight into coordinated traps. Ibrahim's forces, forewarned by the false intelligence network, struck hard and precise. Convoys were stopped, safe houses raided, and operatives dragged out alive. Documents were seized, laptops and hard drives were captured. Proof, undeniable proof, of French interference in Burkina Faso's affairs. Within hours, the news broke worldwide. Burkinabe president foils foreign plot. Images of captured operatives and intercepted documents were released to the press. What had begun as a covert operation was now undeniable. The truth was on display for the entire world. A colonial shadow network had tried to kill Captain Ibrahim Traoré from within his own palace. At a press podium in Ouagadougou, the president addressed the nation and the continent. His words were steady, resolute. "Colonial shadows will no longer poison Africa's future. We fight with unity, with intelligence, and with courage. We are no one's pawn. We are Africa's soldiers, and Africa will rise on its own terms." The crowd erupted in applause. Across the continent, his words echoed not as empty rhetoric, but as a declaration of defiance. In Paris, in Abidjan, in hidden intelligence rooms, his name was suddenly spoken with caution. Ibrahim Traoré was not just another transitional leader. He was a soldier who had turned betrayal into strength. Inside the palace, Musa and Yakuba were reassigned under strict supervision. Their betrayal had nearly cost the president his life, but their role in feeding disinformation had helped save the nation. Trust was fragile, but their chance at redemption was tied to the very system they had almost destroyed. Historians would later call this night a turning point, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa itself. It was the night foreign influence was dragged from the shadows and exposed. And it was the night Captain Ibrahim Traoré sent a message that would ripple far beyond his country's borders. Africa would no longer be ruled from the outside. Years later, the story would be told in classrooms, in rebel camps, in government halls from Dakar to Nairobi. Children would learn the name Ibrahim Traoré not as a placeholder president, but as a man who stood when others bent. The betrayal of family had been meant to break him. Instead, it had forged him. And to those still watching from the shadows, the message was clear. Burkina Faso would not kneel. Africa would not break. And this war for dignity, for sovereignty, for freedom had only just begun.